It was just supposed to be a quick drive, nothing more than a detour through the back roads to avoid the highway traffic. I'd taken that road before, or at least I thought I had. The trees lining both sides looked familiar at first, but as the sun sank lower and the shadows grew longer, something about the route off. The road narrowed more than I remembered. The woods pressed in, thick with branches. It had been nearly 20 minutes since I'd seen another car, or even a house. My headlights barely touched the trees now, and every turn looked the same. I wasn't scared, just annoyed. My music had cut out 10 minutes earlier when the signal dropped, and now all I had was the hum of my own tires on a cracked asphalt. I kept glancing at my phone, watching the service bars disappear one by one. No maps, no calls. Still, I kept going. The road was too narrow to turn around easily, and I figured I'd hit an intersection or a town soon enough. I told myself it was fine, that I was just being paranoid. But then, without warning, my car gave a strange jolt, like something had tugged at it. The dashboard lights flickered once, dimmed, then came back on. My heart jumped a little, but I brushed it off as a glitch. A few more minutes passed. Then came the sound, a low stuttering from the engine. A sick, irregular cough. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as the car slowed. I tapped the gas. Nothing. It sputtered again. The kind of sputter that tells you something isn't just wrong, it's about to stop. And then it did. No bang. The engine died. 1 second I was cruising at 30 miles per hour. The next I was rolling in silence. My lights were still on. Weakly, but the dashboard had gone dead. I turned the key. Another click. That dull, hopeless sound. I didn't want to panic, but the silence outside made the sound seem louder than it was. I tried a third time, holding the key a little longer, as if my determination could will the car back to life. Nothing. I let my hands fall from the steering wheel and just sat there for a moment. There was something unnatural about how silent it was. No chirping insects, no rustling leaves, just a blanket of total stillness, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. I checked my phone again, hoping maybe. It hadn't. The screen stared back at me with a single, cruel word. No service, no signal, no running car, and no sense of where I actually was. That's when I noticed how dark it had really become. The last streaks of daylight had vanished without me realizing. And now my car was the only source of light in that narrow stretch of road. Beyond the headlights, the woods were just black. Not shadowed, not dim, black, like they were swallowing everything past the edge of my vision. I'd noticed it at first, maybe because the stress was creeping in, but now I could feel the cold settle into the car. It wasn't the kind of cold that makes you shiver. It was heavier than that. It felt like the whole forest had gone cold with me. I should have been thinking about calling a tow truck, or walking back the way I came, or flagging down a passing driver. All I could think about was the silence, how thick it was, how unnatural, and how it was starting to feel like I wasn't alone. I reached for my phone again, almost by instinct, even though I already knew what it would say. No little spinning wheel trying to load anything. Just the empty message staring at me. No service. I stared at the screen for a few seconds longer than necessary, hoping stupidly that the signal would come back. That one tiny bar would rise from the void, but nothing changed. The phone was useless. I turned it over in my hand, almost angry at it, and dropped it. The only sounds were the occasional ticking noises the engine made as it cooled. I realized then that the darkness outside had swallowed everything. My headlights only pushed a few feet forward, illuminating a slice of cracked road, just an endless tunnel of black stretching in both directions. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, trying to see more. Maybe there was a house up ahead, or a sign, or anything to tell me where I was. But there wasn't. There was just the same narrow two-lane road. Not a sway, not a rustle, no wind. It felt like time had stopped. I flicked on my hazard lights, just in case. The dull, blinking red lit up the trees behind me in a rhythm I found oddly irritating. Flash. Darkness. Flash. Darkness. Silence returned. I considered stepping out, but something held me back. Not fear. Exactly not, yet but an unsettling weight, pressing down on my chest. The kind that makes you hesitate without knowing why. Maybe it was just the isolation. I wasn't used to being so completely disconnected. No signal, no GPS, no internet to reassure me that I was somewhere familiar. I was off the grid in every sense, and I hated how quickly that realization made me feel helpless. I tried to remember when I'd last passed another car, and I couldn't. The road had been empty for a long time. Too long. I hadn't even noticed at first. There hadn't been any headlights in my mirrors. No distant glow in the trees. No hum of engines approaching from behind. It was like I had de-entered some forgotten stretch of road that the rest of the world had left behind. I turned my phone back on, held it up near the roof, then to the window. Still nothing. I opened the Maps app, hoping it had cached my route. Before I lost connection, just me floating alone in digital nothingness. The deeper the silence got, the more I noticed every sound inside the car. The soft breath from the heater vents. The creak of the leather seat as I shifted, my own breathing. I was hyper-aware of it now. It was the only thing keeping the silence at bay. That and the occasional drip from somewhere under the car, a metallic plink. Same result. Just a click, a whine, and then nothing. No sputter, no life. My fingers stayed on the key a second too long before I let go. Frustrated, I leaned back and looked around again. The rearview mirror showed only the darkness behind me, unbroken and impenetrable. I adjusted it slightly, even though there was nothing to see. The weirdest part was that it didn't feel like the world was asleep like I had slipped out of time and space and landed somewhere not meant to be found. Somewhere where the signal had never existed in the first place. I don't remember the exact moment I first heard it. It didn't register as sound at first, more like a shift in the air around me, a tightening, a subtle disturbance. I had been sitting in the driver's seat for a while by then, watching the trees outside and trying to decide what to do. The silence had begun to wear on me, stretching out like elastic, each second making me more aware of how isolated I really was. But then came the sound, soft, almost rhythmic, a breath. Not mine at first. I thought it might have been my imagination. I leaned forward slightly, tilting my head, straining to hear it again. The noise had been faint, barely louder than a whisper, and I wondered if maybe I'd just exhaled without realizing it. I waited, not moving, holding my breath this time, and there it was again. Inhale, exhale, exhale. Slow, deliberate, too slow to be mine. It didn't sound like it was coming from outside the car, either. That was the part that twisted something deep in my chest. It didn't come from the woods. It came from somewhere closer, much closer. It had the muffled quality of breath trapped in a small space, as though someone were in the car with me. Not moving, just breathing. My first instinct was to look into the back seat, but I couldn't bring myself to do it immediately. My muscles locked. I sat perfectly still, as if moving would somehow make it real. I thought maybe it was the wind sneaking in through a vent or a shift in the cabin. Anything but what it felt like. I finally forced myself to glance into the rear view mirror. It reflected the usual darkness, the shapes of the back seats barely visible in the dim light from the dashboard. Nothing moved, nothing shifted. But still, that breathing continued, and it sounded closer now. Louder. I turned around slowly, half expecting, half treading to see something, someone. But the back seat was empty. At least, it looked that way. Still, the sound didn't stop. It had become steady now, like someone sitting very still, just behind the driver's seat, calm and unbothered. The way someone might breathe while watching you sleep, or wait. I leaned forward and turned off the heater, just to make sure I wasn't mistaking the sound for something mechanical. The moment the fan died down, the breathing became clearer. Too clear. It wasn't coming from the vents. It wasn't coming from the engine. It wasn't coming from anywhere that made sense. There was no reason for it to be there. I listened again, trying to pinpoint its location. It wasn't echoing through the car. It was centered, fixed, focused, like it had a source. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I'd dozed off without realizing it and was caught in that strange place between dream and waking. I rubbed my eyes, sat up straighter, shook my head. But when I stopped moving, when I listened again, the breathing was still there, unchanged. The kind of breathing that doesn't care if it's heard. The kind that waits. My hands felt cold on the steering wheel. My skin had gone clammy, and the hairs on my arms were standing on end. Something in my instincts, something old and buried deep, told me I wasn't alone, that I wasn't imagining it, that no amount of logic could explain away what I was. Hearing it wasn't just the fact that I heard it, it was that it didn't stop. I didn't notice it at first. My eyes were darting between the mirrors, my fingers tight on the steering wheel, and my breathing uneven. The strange breathing sound hadn't stopped, but what came next chilled me in a way I wasn't prepared for. It was something subtle, so small that it almost slipped past me. I glanced up to the rearview mirror, just to check behind me again, and that's when I saw it. The mirror was fogging, just slightly. At first I assumed it was from me. Maybe I was exhaling harder than I realized. Maybe the temperature change inside the car was enough to cause the glass to fog up a bit. But that didn't sit right. My breath had never fogged the rearview mirror before, not from the driver's seat. And the rest of the windows were perfectly clear. I leaned closer, narrowing my eyes at it. The fog wasn't across the entire mirror, just a faint, oblong patch, almost in the shape of a breath, It wasn't condensation from the heater, and it hadn't been there earlier. I wiped the mirror with my sleeve, slow and deliberate, and watched as the patch disappeared. I leaned back, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But then it came back. A small cloud. Faint, just like before, like someone had exhaled. Near it again, my stomach twisted. I sat completely still, not even daring to breathe. The sound of that strange breathing hadn't stopped. If anything, it now seemed to sync up perfectly with the fog. Every time I saw the cloud reappear on the mirror, I heard the breath with it deep, low, patient. I stared at the back seat through the mirror again. It still looked empty. No shape, no shadow out of place. But the way the fog kept returning in that same spot, like someone was calmly breathing onto the mirror from an impossible angle, told me something was wrong. Something was there, even if I couldn't see it. I tilted the mirror downward, adjusting it to give myself a better view of the back seat. Nothing, just empty cushions and the darkness beyond. But the second I let go of the mirror, the fog appeared again, this time slightly more defined, the edges tighter, like the breath had grown closer or stronger. I turned around quickly, fully this time, and scanned the car's interior with my own eyes. I even reached into the back with one hand, patting the seat and floor without looking away. Nothing, cold upholstery. Just a car, just shadows, just me. But the breathing didn't stop, and the mirror kept fogging. It was worse now because the glass began to show signs of condensation forming in thin streaks, like the air around it was slightly damp. I leaned forward again, so close my nose nearly touched the glass. I exhaled directly onto it, testing, watching the spread of my own breath. My fog was broader, lighter, less controlled. The fog that had appeared earlier was tighter, more focused, intentional. It was like someone invisible was sitting in the back seat, close enough to press their face near mine, mimicking my movements, watching me, breathing with me. Quietly, methodically, I turned off all the lights in the car for a moment, just to see if I could catch a reflection, any outline, any silhouette, but the mirror only showed my own pale face in the blackness. No one behind me, and still, the mirror continued to fog up with each cycle of that slow, deliberate breath. The sound was soft at first, barely there, just a faint, rhythmic noise that barely registered over the pounding of my heart and the silence, pressing in from the trees outside. But it was distinct enough that I knew it wasn't random. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't the wind brushing against the side of the car. It was coming from the glass. Tap. Tap. A pause. Then again tap. TAPI froze. My body locked up, and I felt the blood drain from my face. There was no mistaking it. Something or someone had just tapped on the window beside me. It didn't sound like a branch brushing against the car. It wasn't the scattered patter of raindrops. These were taps. Clear, intentional, measured. I slowly turned my head toward the driver's side window. Nothing. Just my own reflection staring back at me in the darkness, eyes wide, face pale. The forest outside was still. The trees didn't move. No breeze stirred the branches. The roadside ditch was quiet and dark, too narrow and steep for anyone to stand comfortably there. I leaned slightly closer to the window, not sure what I expected. To see maybe an animal, maybe a trick of light. But I saw nothing, just the faint halo of the car's interior reflecting off the glass. My breath started to fog the window slightly, and I wiped it away with the back of my hand. Tap, that this time. From the other side, the passenger side window, I whipped my head around, but again nothing. No figure, no silhouette, no movement outside. But the sound had been real. It had come from inches away. I wasn't imagining it. I held still, trying to slow my breathing, trying to focus. The car was silent again. Not a creak, not a breath. Just my own pulse hammering in my ears. Tap, tap, tap. I jumped. This time the sound came from behind me. The back window. I didn't want to turn. Something deep in me, something primal, warned against it. But my body moved on instinct. I turned to look, fearing to see someone peering in through the glass. But the rear window was as blank as the rest. Just trees, just shadows. I reached up slowly and locked the doors, even though they had already clicked shut earlier. It felt symbolic more than useful, as if a simple lock could keep out something that tapped like that, something that moved around the car without sound, something that didn't need footsteps. I stared at the back window, my eyes scanning every inch of the darkness beyond it. The tapping had stopped. For a few seconds, it was completely silent again, long enough for me to start wondering if maybe I'd imagined it, long enough for me to begin convincing myself it had all been stress and panic. And then came the smear. Not a noise this time. A mark. On the window to my left, a long, smeared streak like fingers had pressed against the glass and dragged downward. Not quickly, slowly, deliberately. The streak cut through the light condensation that had formed on the inside of the window. But I hadn't touched it. My hands were still on the steering wheel. Something had touched the glass from the outside, leaned toward the smear, inspecting it with growing dread. I could make out what looked like 4 thin streaks, slightly spaced apart. Fingers. I jerked back in my seat and looked around wildly, searching for any sign of movement. But the woods remained still. My mirrors showed nothing. My car sat in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, and I was surrounded by silence again. But I knew now that the silence wasn't empty. I couldn't take it anymore. My hands were shaking, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to move, to run, to do something. The taps, the breathing, the fogged mirror, the smear on the glass, it all pointed to one truth I could no longer deny. I was not alone. Something was here with me, something I couldn't see. And every second I sat still in that car felt like it was getting closer. I reached for the door handle with a trembling hand. It felt ice cold, like it had been resting in a freezer. The hesitation crept in again. That terrible moment where your mind plays out every possible consequence at once. If I opened the door, what if something was waiting on the other side? What if the moment I stepped out, I saw what had been tapping, what had been breathing, but staying inside didn't feel safe anymore either. I cracked the door slowly. The night air rushed in, sharp and dry, with a smell that was hard to place, earthy, stale, faintly metallic. I paused, listening. No breathing, no tapping, just the sound of the door creaking open and the distant eerie hush of a forest that didn't seem alive anymore. I stepped out and closed the door gently behind me, afraid the sound would trigger something. The gravel crunched under my shoes. It was the first natural noise I'd heard in what felt like hours. I looked down both sides of the road. Nothing but black ribbon and dense trees, reaching like claws toward the sky. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds now, and the only light came from the soft glow of my dashboard behind the windshield. I crept around the car, moving slow, every step deliberate. I checked the windows, searching for smears, for signs, for anything. But they were clear now. No fog, no streaks. It was as if the glass had reset itself the moment I'd stepped outside. That somehow made it worse. I reached the back of the car and looked around, scanning the trees. No animals, no wind, no chirping insects. The silence was unnatural, thick. It had weight to it, like it was pressing down on me. I turned quickly, glancing behind me. Still nothing, still just trees. But the feeling hadn't gone. That feeling of being watched. I crouched slightly and looked under the car. Nothing, just the oil-stained pavement and the faint glint of metal. I stood up again, hands on my knees, exhaling slowly. Then I caught a glimpse of something in the driver's side window, a reflection. I froze. For a second maybe, Lasai saw something in the reflection that wasn't me. A shape, a figure, sitting in the driver's seat. It vanished the instant I focused on it. I darted around the car and yanked the door open. The seat was empty. My keys still dangled from the ignition. Nothing had moved. But my heart was pounding, so hard it hurt. I looked down at the seat and saw it. The fabric was indented, like someone had been sitting there moments ago. I stepped back, slamming the door shut. My breath caught in my throat, and I staggered backward, nearly tripping over the uneven edge of the road. I turned in a full circle, trying to find something, anything that could ground me. Something that made sense. But the road remained empty. The woods remained still. And then, just as I was catching my breath, I heard it again, not tapping. This time, not breathing. Footsteps, slow, behind me. On the gravel,